Welcome to TutorsPlus IB English with me, Dexter Haywood, an IB English tutor, an examiner, and workshop leader. So let's take a clear look at how to strengthen your IB English Paper 1. Your thesis is the anchor of your whole Paper 1 response. It tells the examiner two things: what the text is doing and how it constructs that meaning. And with a strong thesis, your commentary already feels organized before you've even written a single body paragraph. But it's a part that is incredibly difficult to understand how to write properly. So today we're going to fix that. This video will show you exactly how to create a clear, analytical thesis statement using a simple method called T.M.E. It works for prose, poetry, visual text, novels. And once you can write this one sentence for your introduction, your whole commentary becomes easier to control. And remember, if your thesis is vague, the chances are your commentary will be too. Now, many students don't know what a thesis is necessarily in Paper 1 or what it's supposed to do. They either summarize the text, or they list techniques, or include broad sweeping statements, like claiming the writer is criticizing society. But these are too broad. They're not giving the examiner enough to look at. A good thesis doesn't necessarily tell the examiner everything, but it does tell the examiner the angle that you're taking, the way that you're interpreting the text, and the approach that you will analyze. And you have a limited time frame. There is no way that you'll be able to talk about everything in your text. So you need to consider what the rubric is looking for: insightful textual analysis and evaluation, or how the author uses stylistic and structural features to shape meaning. But just choose a few to help you with your idea, not everything. And that's where T.M.E. comes in. Tone, method, effect. Simple as that. 3 points. And these three elements help you build a thesis that is precise, that is analytical, and impossible to misread. So how do you actually turn tone, method, and effect into a thesis statement? Starting with tone. Here's the writer's attitude, and it immediately shows your interpretive stance. Then we add the method, the dominant strategy that's shaping the tone. But it's not a list of devices, but grouped choices that matter. And finally, explain the effect, how these choices position the reader or construct that meaning. And then combine them, and you have a thesis that explains both what the text is doing and how meaning is built. That's all the thesis is: a clear movement between tone, method, extract. And a thesis works when it shows how that meaning is built, not just what it says. So, how can we turn T.M.E. into a fully working thesis statement? And this is the most important part of your thesis, because it tells the examiner your interpretive angle. And your interpretive angle will differ from most other people's. So we need to think about the tone and how there isn't the emotion that the character feels, it's the writer's attitude towards the material. So you need to ask yourself, what atmosphere is the writer constructing? What emotional lens are they giving you to view this situation? For example, a text might describe a crowded street with neutral detail. But if the tone is disorientating, lonely, or satirical, then your entire interpretation shifts. So tone sets the direction of your commentary. If you get it wrong, everything else collapses. And then we had the method, which is where many students go wrong. It turns into a list of techniques. But in a thesis, you're not just naming devices, you're identifying the strategy that the writer uses to create the tone. So you need to think in clusters or approaches, not in isolated features. For example, instead of saying imagery, questions, and adjectives, ask yourself, what is the writer's dominant method of shaping that tone? Maybe it's a fragmented perspective, or there are recurring visual motifs. Maybe there's tight, suffocating composition, or warm versus cold color composition. And these are all methods, as they're not just techniques. So you need to choose the ones that actually build the emotional stance of your text. And if a detail doesn't shape that tone, it doesn't belong in your thesis. And then we move into the effect. And this is where your thesis becomes analytical. Now, effect is not, this shows the theme of da-da-da, or this tells the reader that da. Effect is the reader's experience of tone and method working together. So you need to ask yourself, how is the reader positioned? How am I meant to feel or interpret when I'm seeing or reading? For example, if we look at guilt, distance, suspense, sympathy or irony, curiosity even, these are all effects that make the writer's interpretation visible. They're all things that we as readers feel when we're reading different texts. And this transforms your thesis from description into interpretation, which is where you'll land with the marks in criterion B. So T.M.E. works like this. The tone gives your thesis direction. The method provides evidence of how your tone is constructed. And the effect explains why that construction matters. And remember, if you're finding this helpful, feel free to click like and subscribe below so you don't miss the next IB English guide. I'll see you there. So let's apply all of that to a literary extract that mirrors the style of a real IB paper 1. So we can see the extract below. Firstly, identify the tone, step 1. The tone here is quite cynical. It's amused, but also aware of something emptier beneath that humor. Then we need to identify the key method. So 2 traces here stand out. We've got hyperbole in the product names, for example. And we've got an ironic narrative distance in describing the shopper's behavior. All of these combined creates a humor and a subtle critique. And then we identify the effect. So the reader recognizes the absurdity of the wellness aisle and begins to question the seriousness with which shoppers treat empty marketing premises. And then we can put all of this into a thesis together following T.M.E. So the text adopts a lightly cynical tone using hyperbolic product descriptions and ironic narrative distance to encourage readers to recognize the emptiness beneath commercial wellness culture. You see how it all flows, how it all comes together. You have your ideas and it leads into what you'll be addressing in your body paragraphs. And if your thesis can guide your paragraphs, it's working. So let's try the same example with a visual text. So you can see how T.M.E. applies across the whole paper 1 exam. So we have this insomnia advert. Again, firstly, looking at the tone. The advert's tone here is tense. It's quietly foreboding. It's not dramatic, but it is quite unsettling. We have the method. Again, looking at 2 traces, we've got the cold blue lighting on the face of the character. And we also have the repeating floating timestamps that visualize these relentless hours of the character. And the combination is quite simple, but it's powerfully suggestive. And then we have the effect. So the viewer becomes aware of that mental toll of sleeplessness. And they feel nudged towards the app as a solution. And we can turn all of this into a complete thesis. The advert adopts a tense, quietly foreboding tone, using cold blue lighting and repeating floating timestamps to highlight the psychological pressure of sleeplessness, and to position the viewer to see tracking as a necessary solution. See how it again progresses, it leads into what we're seeing and how we can address it, how we can analyze it. And turning this on its head, if your thesis mentions 5 techniques, is not a thesis. It will lead you into description. There'll be too much going on. So then if we consider this to alternative versions of thesis, some good, some not so good. So we have a potential bad. This advert shows a woman who can't get sleep and uses color and lighting to get the viewer's attention. It's too vague. There's no interpretation. It's very descriptive of what's going on in the image. We have an almost, adapting that a little bit further. So the advert uses dark colors and repeated numbers to show that the woman is stressed. It's better, but it's still very literal. And it's not talking about tone or effect, which are crucial. Moving into our best version, the advert adopts a tense, quietly foreboding tone, using cold blue light and repeating timestamps to highlight the psychological strain of insomnia, and to position the viewer to see tracking as a necessary solution. We're really flowing through here to our ideas and to what we'll be addressing in our body. So your thesis is the premise of the commentary that you must keep in your body paragraphs. It's talking about the things that you are going to discuss in your essay. So a strong paper one thesis doesn't summarize, it interprets. Remember T.M.E, the tone, the text attitude, the method, the key choices that shape the tone, and the effect of how the reader is positioned. And once you can articulate these three things in one clear sentence, your thesis will guide every paragraph that follows. And if you want personalized support with your paper one commentary, you want someone to check your thesis statements or guide you into producing solid thesis statements, you can book a session with me, Dexter Haywood, or another TutorsPlus English specialist. And if this helped, feel free to like and subscribe below so you don't miss the next breakdown. Thank you.